Welcome to another Signal Conversation. We are fortunate to be joined today by Vanessa Otero, the founder and CEO of Adfontes Media. Vanessa was a patent attorney in Denver, Colorado, when she created the media bias chart about 8 years ago, which led to the founding of Adfontes Media in 2018. She needed to fulfill a overwhelming demand for more information about the chart she created, which we'll be talking about. People need to navigate a increasingly complex media landscape, and Adfontes was born to help analyze the content of the media sources on that chart and more. So we'll get into that. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. I want to start with the basics for those who are listening and watching who are not aware of Adfontes. Can you give us a quick history and mission of Adfontes?
Absolutely. We rate the news for reliability and bias. That's what we do. We do that with a team of humans and also with machine learning and AI now. And our mission is really to rate all the news, like really all the news in all the different formats it comes in, all the different languages. And the reason we do that is because the world needs news ratings, and news ratings can positively transform not only the media ecosystem but our broader society. So that's what we're up to.
Yeah. So you've been a champion of news for many years, but you were a patent attorney prior. How did you come to creating this media bias chart? What drove your passion for news?
Well, I've always been really interested in news and politics, but more so like good arguments and in being able to convince others of your position and being able to come to agreements. And what I saw in the 20 run up to the 2016 election was just this immense state of polarization that seemed to be so much worse from 2012 in that election. And you could really see it, notice it on Facebook, where the news feed was really popular, and folks would fight with each other about, Hillary versus Trump, and share, really biased, unreliable news sources with each other to try to convince each other, and it wouldn't work, and people would just unfriend each other, and it seemed like people couldn't tell that their preferred news sources were so different from their friends and families' news sources, such that they lived in alternate realities. So I had this idea for this infographic because I was thinking about my own news consumption. Like some of the stuff is better, some is okay, some is worse. It's not as simple as, news versus opinion or real news versus fake news. And there are things that are left and right and middle, but there are things that are much further out there, just way out there. And I thought it would be helpful to like talk to my friends and family by creating a little infographic. I'm a big nerd, so I like did that as a hobby, nights and weekends for a few weeks, analyzing the news, and it went massively viral. People started. I got lots of opinions from everybody on the internet about where the news sources should be, higher, lower, left, and right. But people kept asking for the data, the methodology, and at the time it was just me and the basic methodology taxonomy I had created, and they wanted me to add more news sources. And they also accused me of being biased, which is true because I'm
Right.
human. Of course, I'm biased. Everybody's biased. So I figured in order to do all those things and to really rate all the news, we would have to have lots more people do this with me, people of different political viewpoints, especially, and and grow it into something sustainable.
When people ask you, how do you determine, where a news source fits on your graph, which we'll put a link to below this conversation. Um, how do you make those decisions?
Well, it's all based on content analysis. And the name Ad Fontes actually has nothing to do with ads or ad industry, even though we are in it. But it's Latin for to the source, like to the fountain, literally, to the source. And the other way of measuring news content or like trust in news just anything like perception wise about news is typically opinion polling of consumers. So it's not uncommon for research centers to say, do you trust Fox News or MSNBC? But the answer typically tells you more about the political viewpoint of the person. Half will say yes and half will say no for each source, just
Right.
different halves. Looking at the content is much more regular and predictable and repeatable. So we developed this methodology to, in conjunction with journalism professors and folks who've done content analysis in the past. I mean, it's like an academic method. Uh, Recruiting folks from left, right, and center. And what we do today is we have a rating rubric, and think of it like rating judging gymnastics. You're trying to judge something that's
Mhm.
inherently subjective, and regular observers can look at a gymnastics routine and say, like, generally, yeah, that one was better than the other. But the really trained judges are looking for very specific things, and they can get like very precise and have similar scores to each other because they're trained in that. So our analysts are like that. They're trained in our content analysis methodology, and so for every single source we rate, we're rating individual articles as a representative sample of those that source, or individual TV episodes, or individual podcasts for TV and audio. And the
Mhm.
overall individual articles of the score make up an overall score, and that's how we come up with it. Each article is looked at by somebody from the left, the right, and the center, like all it's pods of three, all looking at content at the same time. So we've done that for over 80,000 pieces of content manually over the years, and that's what we use to train our machine learning model that now rates tens of thousands of articles automatically, just in substantially real time.
I mean, the news ecosystem is, despite, and we're going to get into this, despite it being on the decline, it is very large.
Yes.
And so I imagine you do have to use machine learning to cover it. But it's also extremely fraught. There are a lot of, as you pointed out from your experience early on, there are a lot of you know sites masquerading as news.
Yes.
Do you identify those and rate those, or is your subset only qualified news sources that you've identified as as news organizations?
Great question, because we rate basically everything that we call news or news-like information. And that news-like information category is big. There's a ton of stuff that's opinion, analysis, opinion, and not that there's anything necessarily wrong with analysis or opinion. There's many podcasts are in an analysis and opinion format just by their very nature. And there are ones that are more reliable and less, like ones that use more facts, have a higher density of facts to support those particular arguments than others. And then you have things that are opinion. People call them opinion, but they're worse than that. They are propagandistic because they use name calling, insults, dehumanization, vilification, or they're really selective or incomplete. And that rating that kind of content is important because people get their information that they make really important decisions in their lives about, like who to vote for and like whether to get a vaccine. So it's not
Hmm.
just like, it's called the media bias chart because like all forms of media are where folks get their information from. There's no barrier to entry there. I mean, anyone can be a news or information source. And on the whole, I think that's a net positive for society. But we just have to navigate this learning curve where we just have more information than we ever had access to before, and so we have to sort it into what's more reliable and what's less. So we rate everything.
Yeah, well, um, I think it's possible that a number of folks in our audience are not aware of this, but do have a point of view about advertising because we have a large marketing related audience. Uh, and over the past 10 years, advertisers have really left
Hmm.
news. They've stopped supporting news, particularly with the growth of programmatic advertising, both in the large platforms like Facebook and Google and others, but also the open web. They just sort of set their programmatic preferences to avoid
Right.
news, and that's been bad for the news environment. Given that, what what does your company do to help support the news ecosystem?
This is really important and fundamental to what we do, and it informs the problem you describe, informs the product. When we first approached the media industry, because folks had identified, hey, there's an application for your data in brand safety, and I thought, great, what's brand safety? The idea that you don't want your brand advertisements next to content that's unsavory in some form or fashion, and I thought, okay, well, that would include, misinformation, extreme polarizing content. Great. So we would go to the big advertisers and say, look, we can help you avoid this misinformation and polarizing content. And they'd say, great, but that's not really a problem for us because we just don't advertise in news anymore at all. And this
Right.
is a function of the last 10 years. This is the brand safety as a suite of tools and technologies didn't really exist in large part before that. And it has coincided with the rise in the programmatic ecosystem. So a lot of folks do know our chart, they know our company and our advocacy generally for news, but what's most important is actually doing something about the problem, bringing the advertisers back to news. So what we do is we provide our data. And this is going to get a little bit technical for marketing folks may appreciate this. We provide inclusion and exclusion segments, both the domain and the URL level. So, and we put those into the programmatic pipes and all the various other ways that advertisers can make their decisions. So whether a media buyer is, brand or an agency is trying to do planning or activation, they can use our data to identify the most reliable, least biased news sources and bring their ad dollars back to those. So that means, integrations into SSPs and DSPs, namely the trade desk. We have a large, inclusion segments where you can, use pre-bid contextual filter to actively bring your ad dollars back into reliable news. So we're really heartened that we've been able to actually get brands from saying, hey, we're not advertising in news anymore, to, you know what, we've let's dip our toe back in the water, because the the big the the part about the brand safety conversation, like the unfounded myth, is that all news is brand unsafe, and there really isn't data to show that. Uh, Typically, the brand safety issues are associated only with highly polarizing content, like a really extreme left or really extreme right content.
And you're a startup, so I wouldn't imagine that you can solve this problem alone. But I happen to have a little bit of a dog in this fight. I've been involved in the news business a long
Yeah.
time, and I've found that trying to convince advertisers to dip their toe back in and support news is kind of a full time job,
Yes.
and it's not a full time job that a lot of people are doing. So, can you make the case for why advertisers should support news?
Yes. It truly is not enough to just say, hey, you should do it for journalism and society and the democracy we live in, because it's a business, and if advertisers think they can get the better results elsewhere, or the same results elsewhere, and be better safe than sorry, then folks have gone in that direction. But there is a strong business case for returning back to news, because the studies show that the research that we've released shows that uh, the audiences in high quality news have the favorable demographics that most advertisers are looking for. The um, it, there are no brand safety risks associated with high quality news, and the because unfortunately news content is has been avoided for such a long time, the CPMs, like the cost of the ad inventory as compared to non-news content, is actually a deal.
Right.
Their premium environments, like the all the things that you'd want from like a high quality news environment are there in news. And so what we're seeing, and this is still early days, but those brands that have gone from no news to news are seeing the kind of increases in KPIs that are really important to them, like low cost per unique reach. Like that means they're getting a deal on the CPM, and they're getting unique reaches, unduplicated reach, because news content is 26% approximately of the programmatic landscape. It's roughly 20 to 30% of any content landscape, whether it's podcast or TV or what have you. So if you're avoiding that, like that, it just makes sense. Unduplicated reach. Like I, as a news consumer, a avid news consumer, there's really only three places you can reach me: news, sports, Instagram, right? Those are my channels.
Yeah.
And there are some folks that they're only or primarily on news content. So reaching those folks, you got to do it as a business, as an advertiser.
Yeah. That's a strong case. As we wrap up here, I want to ask you about kind of the topic of the last year, year and a half, which is generative AI. You employ machine learning in your core business. What do you believe the impact of generative AI is going to be both on your business and on the ecosystem in which you operate?
And unfortunately, the negative impacts are being felt for like faster than the positive impacts. Folks like the business I'm in, we use machine learning, and folks think, well, can't generative AI with LLMs like do that kind of work more accurately? And the answer is possibly, but also like the compute, like to be able to use generative AI for this kind of problem solving rather than using machine learning. It's not enough juice for the squeeze right now. But the negative impacts are the fact that the open web is now more easily cluttered with just voluminous garbage. One of the biggest problems that news publications face in the open web is that there's, again, no, there hasn't been any barrier to entry practically for creating new websites. So things like made for advertising websites or plagiarized websites from news content, those have just proliferated over the years. And with generative AI, it's just way easier to make them, and they don't look as low quality as they used to. So it's the competition that the journalism organizations face. I mean, there's a finite number of news publications with journalists putting out quality content. But if you had like 1,000 news publishers and like 60,000 in a sea of 60,000 websites, some of which are really low quality, well, that sea of 60,000 really easily grows to 80,000 or 100,000 or what have you with generative AI. Whereas so the competition, like literal number of websites, has increased, and that creates an issue for getting programmatic dollars in the ecosystem to
But
journalism.
it sounds like it might be good for your business because if I'm an advertiser looking to make sure I don't end up in all that junk, I'll want to use the segments that are provided to me through programmatic channels that are derived from Adfontes, right?
That's exactly the idea.
Well, Vanessa Otero, thank you so much for joining us today for a Signal Conversation. I'm looking forward to tracking your work and appreciate it as a journalism professor, among other things. So thank you very
Thank you,
much.
John.